Flying monkeys. Callie's face scrunched in question. Eva tried to ignore her best friend's bewilderment, bobbing her head at an alarming rate. The two women had been in Eva's apartment for the better part of an hour, with Callie hunched over a printed document while Eva practically perched on her shoulder like an eager parrot. It had felt more like a century, maybe even 2 centuries, while she waited not so patiently for her most trusted beta reader to finish the ending of her latest literary masterpiece. "I think it adds the perfect touch," said Eva, leaving her spot for the comfort of the neighboring armchair. "Unexpected, too. When the undead monkeys attack, the guild will have no choice but to side with the necromancers and save the land of Estrella." Callie blinked. With her face screwed up in question, she seemed to search for a punchline to a joke that hadn't been told. And suddenly, Eva's smile felt much heavier. "Eva," Callie drummed her fingers on the arm of her chair. "I get where you're coming from. You want to catch your readers off guard, but doesn't this idea seem a little out there?" While Callie's fingers thudded harder against the wood, Eva waited expectantly for affirmation to follow the gentle criticism. Seconds ticked by in awkward silence. Eva's facade crumbled, along with any remnants of oblivious pride. Shifting uncomfortably in her seat, she straightened her posture and fought the downturning of her lips. The attempt was in vain, however, and the smile finally fell. Callie leaned forward to put a hand on her knee. "It's not bad. I just think it could use a little—" "It's terrible." Eva stood, letting her friend's hand slip away. She raked her fingers through her hair with a long huff. "I've tried everything," she muttered. "What kind of writer am I if I can't come up with a decent ending?" An uncomfortable pause dropped between them, with Eva continuously stroking her hair and Callie nipping the dead skin on her lips. Their eyes averted to the floor, the wall, the knickknacks gathered upon a nearby bookcase. Anything but each other. Eva swiped her watering eyes. If it hadn't been for the company sitting across from her, and the promise of another friend joining them at any moment, she would have raced to her room for solitude. The recliner squeaked as Callie stood, placing a gentle hand on Eva's shoulder. "You have a gift." Callie's voice dropped to a softer, more encouraging tone. "You'll finish this book eventually, but you can't settle for any ending that comes along. It has to be the right fit." "And what's that? Because I would really like to know." "That's up to you to find, but building up a 5-book war between dark and light and ending it with a peaceful handshake over flying monkeys isn't what you're looking for." She was right, and Eva knew it. Lately, it felt like every word she typed was wrong, and writing one paragraph of presentable material was like pushing against a brick wall. After multiple attempts, defeat had settled so deep into her bones that she nearly resigned herself to never finishing the series. Perhaps the unending mystery would ignite a firestorm within her small online reader circle and give her books the social media push they needed. A gentle shoulder squeeze brought her back to Callie's eyes, so plagued with concern that their usual dusty blue had faded to a stormy gray. She looked as though she wished to vanish into the shadows her clothing emanated, and she likely could have if it hadn't been for the stark contrast of the hair framing her gaunt face, beginning as a sultry black near the roots and fading into tones of ice and cyan. "Maybe you need a break," she said. "What I need is some strong coffee and a rousing game of Dungeons and Dragons." Eva shook Callie's hand away and flashed a reassuring smile, as if her soul wasn't crumbling to dust under the weight of her wavering creativity. She turned away to conceal the fraudulent expression, making her way across the cramped living quarters and through an archway on the far end of the room. Safely in the confines of her kitchen, she let loose a heavy sigh and selected her favorite dark roast from a countertop rack of single-serve pods. Maybe that was her problem after all. Maybe she could blame that afternoon's horrendous writing session on drinking far less coffee than the average day and start over with a fresh mug. Seconds passed before the air was saturated with the soothing aroma of her favorite brew. It trickled into a custom-made tankard, with her fantasy world sigil burned into the wooden sides in intricate detail. Upon closing her eyes, she could almost hear patrons bustling within an old tavern north of the village of Edenberry, sitting just off the path at the entrance to Frommer Woods. The Elysian Lily's brightened interior buzzed with life, as the nightly dinner rush brought hordes of travelers from across the land. Boisterous laughter echoed from two halflings at the bar, watching their friend turn trinkets into toads with a simple incantation. Sprites flounced from table to table in drunken stupors, balls of color shooting between tavern dwellers' heads. But her attention remained on the humanoid couple in a shadowed corner booth. They spoke in hushed tones, careful not to bring attention to themselves as they indulged in luminescent brews from tankards much like the one beneath her coffee maker. The first was a youthful woman, clad in black leather from head to toe, whose sea-green eyes shifted to keep careful watch over the crowd. She twirled strands of midnight hair around her finger absent-mindedly, a nervous tic that had called her bluff more times than she cared to admit. Meanwhile, the man at her side was unbothered by the surrounding ruckus. A childlike glint shone in his amber eyes with every sip of his drink and every drag of the herbal blunt between his fingers. 3 sudden knocks threw Eva back to reality so fast that the sight of her own kitchen startled her. She blinked rapidly, heart thundering and head racing from the scene's surrealness. Part of her wished to shut her eyes once more, to make her character show her the ending she desired, but the sounds of their favorite hangout had faded, muffled under the knocking at her door. "I'll get it," hollered Callie. Eva pulled her mug from the coffee maker. A quick sip of encouragement made her wince, the scalding liquid numbing patches of her tongue. For a moment, her eyes flitted to the liquor cabinet at the other end of the kitchen. A strong cup of joe could fix most problems, but the generous splash of stronger assistance never hurt. She shook her head. Alcohol would have to wait until her next writing session, without additional company, and, judging by the excited chatter bubbling through the apartment, that company had arrived in full force. Bobby could be heard long before she was seen, from the pleasant trill of her voice to the audible skip in her step that always created a stir with the tenants below. She knew how to make her entrance known. Not that many minded, not when she radiated glittering beams of the brightest morning sunlight. After another searing gulp, Eva gripped her mug tight, slapped a smile across her lips, and emerged from the kitchen. Even now, Bobby's yellow tunic and light-washed capris brought out the most stunning copper tones in her complexion and complemented the honey highlights in her mahogany curls. "Eva!" Bobby's sing-song tone carried melodically across the room. Though Eva's insides had twisted into a tightly wound ball seconds before, Bobby's outstretched arms eased her nerves long enough to share the bear hug her best friend deserved. They stayed wrapped up for a moment, swaying back and forth gleefully until Bobby disengaged and swiveled around. Her dark eyes landed on a flat, grid-lined board atop the coffee table. She bent down to survey the small boxes beneath, where miniature characters, monster figurines, and various other campaign materials had been organized in perfect rows. Tabletop role-playing games had long been her specialty, and pride swelled in Eva's chest at her best friend's approval of the night's setup. "You went all out tonight," Bobby said, taking an extra long gander at a map laying open atop the colorful grid. "I'm impressed." Callie poked her head over their friend's shoulder for a better look. "She learned from the best, Bobs." "Of course she did." Bobby swatted her playfully. "I train my up-and-coming game masters well." Eva's nerves calmed as she watched them examine the props laid out for the campaign. For the first time that night, a genuine smile crossed her lips while they theorized about lore and fawned over the hand-painted miniatures of their characters. Even Callie's enthusiasm, usually muted between cynicism and sarcastic tones, bubbled over the edge. "Is this everyone?" Bobby asked. Eva nodded. "Looks like you two have the campaign to yourselves." "Hold up." Bobby raised a finger in question. "Didn't you invite Jensen? You were just telling me how fascinated he was over the game." Trying to ignore the heat blossoming up her neck, Eva brought her mug to her lips. Her coffee was still hot, but not scalding, unless her taste buds were too numb to notice. As she lowered her drink, Bobby's relentless stare was matched with an all-knowing grin. "If I didn't know better, I'd swear you're disappointed." "I thought it'd be fun." Eva found herself unable to look at either friend. "He's a great guy, but he doesn't seem to have anyone to hang out with after work. I thought this would give him some company." Bobby's gaze was searing. As the oldest member of their group, she had been around the block enough times, whether it be with relationships or other parts of life that Eva had yet to experience, that words alone were never enough to fool her. Yet, for some godforsaken reason, Eva never stopped trying. "What?" she asked, but the blush rose no matter how hard she held onto her angelic smile. When Bobby's grin stretched wider, she knew it was all over. "Oh, hon, it wasn't just a kind thought, and you know it." "I don't know what you're—" "Don't stand there like you're innocent." Bobby wagged a finger in her direction. "You two stop by my coffee shop every day without fail. That man knows how to order your perfect brew based on the day, your mood, and the phase of the moon. Don't try to tell me he isn't someone special." Eva gnawed on her lip until blood grazed her tongue. She quickly glanced at Callie, hoping to find assistance with at least one person in the room, but her friend only laughed. It was nice to know that she could only count on herself in moments of sheer awkwardness. "Jensen is a great guy," she said. "He just isn't my type." "Is he really not your type, or is it because his name isn't Emrys?" If her cheeks didn't stop trying to burst into flames, Eva was sure she'd crumble to ash before the night was over. "Okay!" She clapped her hands, stepping around her friends to put herself between them and the coffee table. "We'd better get this game rolling, or else we'll still be playing when the sun comes up." The two of them shared an amused smile before sitting around the table. Even so, the silence was a welcome change. As they readied themselves for the game ahead, pulling out character sheets and snacks from their bags, Eva took a deep, calming breath. "It's just another story," she told herself. "You're just writing out loud." It couldn't have been much different when the campaign was tailored around the one story she could tell in a heartbeat, her own. It was a trial run, meant to test a fully customizable game based on her book series and donned with the same name, The Keepers of Estrella. Providing she succeeded at bringing the story to life on a battle map, the homebrew guide would eventually grace her blog for readers to enjoy. Once her friends settled in, Eva snagged her notebook from under the table and stood. Public speaking was a familiar task in her line of work, but her companion's curious stares made the nerves swirl faster in her chest. "Welcome, dear travelers, to the land of Estrella." Her voice came out clearer and stronger than she expected. "For centuries, common folk have entrusted their protection to the Lixanima Guild, a league of warriors tasked by the king to rid the land of evil." Callie was already at work, hastily jotting down every word in her leather-bound journal. Bobby scooted to the edge of her chair with a proud smile that made Eva's lingering nerves dissipate. "Since the dawn of civilization, necromancy has been considered the darkest form of magic. The guild has taken pride in executing camps of necromancers, leaving only ash and screams on the wind, nothing usable for reanimation by others of their kind. Despite their efforts, a new foe has risen, a darkness unseen by man since the day heaven and hell were separated. While many believe this is the necromancer's plot to grasp the powers of hell and seek revenge on the guild, you do not." Even the sound of Callie's pencil scraping against paper stopped at her words. Eva could hardly contain her swelling excitement. "You believe the only way to banish the darkness is by finding someone with the power to control it. You are traveling the land in search of a pair of legends. Thana, a necromancer kissed by the Reaper's touch, with the power of death and resurrection at her fingertips, Her gaze swept to the character's figurine, staring at her from behind her propped-up screen. And her companion, Emrys, a phoenix risen from the ashes to help extinguish the dark plague. Only once your heroes are found. Flashing lights added to the ambiance, causing Callie and Bobby to sit up at attention. Eva paused, fingers gripping the edges of her notebook. They could still play without electricity, but the last thing she wanted was to deal with another outage. It had been an ongoing issue for too long, ever since the storm that battered the local park months before. Shaking her head, she peered back at her notes, but the ongoing flashes and beeps from various electronic devices kept her from continuing, until a series of loud, slow robotic tones emanated from Bobby's back pocket. Bobby's eyes widened as she scrambled to grab her phone. Her jaw went slack at the lit-up screen and she jumped to her feet, expression wrought with panic. "What's wrong?" said Callie. Bobby shook her head, sending a cascade of curls in every direction. "It's my security system." The color drained from Eva's face until she nearly matched Callie's pale hue. She dropped her notebook onto the table. "For the coffee shop?" she asked. Bobby nodded, snatching her bag from the floor and slinging it over her shoulder. "Someone's trying to break in,"